fantasy game, a dream game. We've seen the league go back and forth, and crowd is standing up. It goes now to Bird. Bird goes up top. And a three-point field goal to Bird. 4 seconds left. He hits it. And it's all tied up again. All right, Ainge is going to put the ball into play. And where do we go? It's going to go to Bird. He's got a shot. Get it. It is good. It's a 3-point field goal. And that's it. It's all over. Can you believe that? Can you believe it? He hit a 3-pointer with no time on the clock. And they win the ball.
Moments like these were commonplace at the TD Garden over the course of Larry Bird's illustrious NBA career. Larry Bird, a man once revered as a god, for on the basketball court, it seemed that he was. Whether it be his penchant to humiliate opponents with his otherworldly creativity with the ball in his hands, or with his unrelenting trash talk, tales of Bird's heroics and sacrifice are that of legend in the basketball universe. However, while stories of the feats that Larry Bird accomplished on the hardwood continue to echo and reverberate throughout history, what about tales of how Larry Bird became Larry Bird? How a boy from French Lick, Indiana transformed into the man who many across the world came to love so dearly. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what we're going to be taking a look at today, the origin of Larry Bird and the man who created him. Shout out to SeatGeek for sponsoring this video. SeatGeek, the world's best way to purchase tickets to NBA games or any other live events, with a host of features, including being able to see a view from a seat before buying a ticket, a rating system for prices to make sure you're getting the best deal available, and also getting $20 off your first order by using the promo code SDC at checkout. The app really is a must-have for anyone who attends or plans to attend live events. Once again, thank you to SeatGeek for sponsoring this video, and I'll have the link so you can download the app down in the description box below. Let's face it, a majority of NBA players don't emerge from the most ideal circumstances. As for the most part, their early lives are filled with turmoil and grief caused by the effects of crippling poverty. Exposure to such an environment at an early age oftentimes being the catalyst that fuels their desire, their need for greatness. Born into a situation that affords them with very little to lose, they're able to bet it all, swing for the fences and pray that their determination and efforts will someday pay off and provide both themselves and their families with a lifestyle that goes well beyond anything they would have previously been able to comprehend. Especially in today's world, where being elite in between the four lines found in the hardwood results in riches that most couldn't fathom even in their wildest of dreams. That, though, wasn't necessarily the case for Larry Bird. Now, don't get me wrong, his upbringing was far from anything that would be considered ideal, but what was different about Bird was that his passion for the game of basketball didn't come from the thought of the riches that would come his way as a result. Since back in the days of Bird's youth, being a professional basketball player was more or less a side hustle as opposed to a lucrative career, and the NBA as a whole at the time didn't seem like it was destined to be around much longer. With the Jerry West, Wilt Chamberlains, and Bill Russells of the world all retired, the league was now faced with the problem of not having adequate enough star power to overshadow the infestation of players addicted to various illegal substances. So with all of that in mind, the question of what in the world drove Larry Bird to become the legendary player that we all know him as today becomes that much more intriguing as a result. And to find the answer to that question, you need not look any further than the people responsible for bringing him into the world in the first place, Joe and Georgia Bird. Growing up wasn't always easy for me. My family didn't have much, so we appreciated anything we had. The way I grew up was very different from most people who I have met. Very different than most people grew up is nothing short of an understatement. Born and raised in French Lick, Indiana, for the longest time Larry Bird was unaware of the depths of financial disparity that his family faced, mostly because in the small town of French Lick, everyone was poor. Both his father and mother worked tirelessly throughout the week in order to provide for Larry and his 5 siblings. His mother as a waitress at 2 different restaurants, while his father constantly switched from working one factory job to another. His parents Working long hours throughout the day, Bird and his siblings were often left searching for ways to occupy their time outside the house, which for the longest time was done through the sport of baseball, which he and his brothers enjoyed playing on a concrete field not too far from his home, which in retrospect might not have been the best idea since errant balls typically resulted in broken windows that the Birds couldn't afford to fix. It was during these tough times, however, that Bird learned some very important life lessons that he would carry with him throughout his playing career, of which none were more important to Bird than the concept of working hard for a day's pay no matter what the circumstances, a lesson Bird would learn from his father. See, even though Joe Bird switched jobs on a regular basis, he seemed to always take pride in whatever work it was he was doing at the time. When you're doing something, make sure you see it to the end, put the finishing touches on it, then you can have something to be proud of. In essence, that is what Joe Bird told his son Larry that instilled the belief in Larry that no matter what happens throughout the course of a season, awards, accolades, milestones, it was all meaningless unless he and the Boston Celtics finished the year by winning a championship. After all, how could someone as competitive and driven as Bird ever take pride in losing? This was the guy who played through numerous injuries that would have sidelined other players all because he wanted to see the job to completion. Unless he could not physically walk out of the court, Larry Bird was going to give you everything that he had, which happens to be another trait that Bird picked up from his father, as Larry recounts a time when his father came home from working a long day of construction aided by 3 other men. The man had to help Joe Bird not only walk home, but also take off his boots as Joe's foot had been badly mangled on the job. According to Larry, it looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. Despite that though, Larry said his father Joe never complained a single time, but instead merely propped his foot up, grabbed a couple of beers, and when morning came, laced up his boots as tight as he could, and went back to work. See, Joe Bird realized that missing even a single day of work will result in his family being unable to eat that day. With his wife working 2 jobs in order to make ends meet, how could he stay home from work just because of a jacked up foot? The man had his pride after all, and he was willing to do whatever he felt was necessary in order to provide for his family. Despite his efforts though, Joe Bird was barely able to make ends meet. Most of the time after the Birds paid the bills and brought groceries for the week, they'd be lucky to have $20 left over. And even the groceries that they bought never seemed to last past the 4th day of the week. After that, the Bird siblings were forced to survive off eating sliced bread along with whatever leftover condiments they could find until their father got paid again. Eventually, the financial bind that had ensnared the Birds took a toll on their family, mainly Joe and Georgia Bird. With Joe refusing to sell a house that they could no longer afford, the prospects of any type of change in the near future looking bleak, Joe and Georgia eventually divorced, forcing Joe to give up the house and move back in with his parents. And the divorce, losing the house, and moving back in with his parents on top of the fact that he couldn't afford to pay the child support that he owed for 6 children, sent Joe Bird spiraling into a deep and dark depression. And as the holidays came around, it became clear to Larry that the funk his father was in wasn't going to end anytime soon, if at all. I'm not going to be around much longer. No use in me living this way. You kids will be better off if I was gone. When those words traveled from the mouth of Joe Bird into the ears of his adolescent son Larry, even at a young age, Larry knew what was going to come next, even if everyone else thought Joe Bird was just trying to make another one of his melodramatic attempts at a joke. It was no joke. Having served in the Korean War, Joe Bird knew that if he died, his family would receive a lump sum of money from the government, and for a guy who felt he could no longer provide for his family, his own death seemed like the only option. One morning, not too long after, police showed up to Joe Bird's current residence at his parents' house with a warrant for his arrest due to past due child support payments. Seeing as to how small of a town French Lick was, the officers knew Joe Bird, and Joe Bird knew the officers, which is why when he asked them for an hour or 2 to get his things in order, they obliged, saying they'd be back later that day to take him in. By then though, it would be too late. After the officers left, Joe Bird used the time to say his final goodbyes to a few of the people he was closest to in town, headed to the pub for a final pint of beer, went back to his parents' home, and ended his own life in their backyard with a shotgun. His family was devastated. At the time, Larry was 19 years old and just beginning to ascend into the player who, alongside Magic Johnson, would breathe a breath of life into the exasperated NBA, making it even sadder, since had Joe Bird stuck it out just a little while longer, things would have started to turn around for both him and his family more than he could have ever imagined.